He's looking at his phone. The results just came back, and right there on the screen, 100% Germanic Europe. He exhales, satisfied, like something just got confirmed that he always suspected about himself. And here's the thing. He's right, completely right, about the last 4,500 years. Because before that, the story is something else entirely. Something that would make that percentage on the screen look like the most misleading truth ever told. Here's what scientists actually found when they started pulling ancient DNA from the burial sites of central Germany. They found 3 completely different populations, stacked on top of each other, none of them aware the others were coming. Ice Age hunters who had lived in that land for 30,000 years. And then Neolithic farmers who arrived from Anatolia, what's now Turkey, and essentially replaced them. And then a third group, horsemen, from a flat, burning steppe thousands of kilometers to the east, who showed up around 2800 BCE and changed everything about what it means to be European. And here's the part that stops people cold. That last group, those steppe outsiders, make up roughly 75% of the ancestry of modern Germans. Not a fraction, not a thread, 3/4. Wolfgang Hack had been working on this at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, Germany, for years. In 2015, his team published what became one of the most cited ancient DNA studies ever written. And what he found wasn't a gradual blending over thousands of years. It was a flood, a near total genetic transformation of Central Europe in what looks, from the data, like 2 or 3 generations. This isn't just ancient history. This percentage is in your body right now. And here's what makes it even stranger. The thing people call the Germanic look. Fair skin, light hair, blue eyes. That combination didn't exist anywhere in Europe before the Bronze Age. It wasn't inherited from one ancient people. It assembled itself, like a chemical reaction between 3 groups that had never met before and would never fully separate again. 40,000 years ago, someone carved a small figure from a mammoth tusk in a cave in what is now Baden-Württemberg in Germany. We call it the Venus of Hohlefels. The person who made it carried a maternal lineage scientists label haplogroup U5. That lineage is nearly extinct in modern Germany. The first known artist on German soil has almost no living descendants. Her people vanished. Then the people who replaced her vanished too. So who exactly are modern Germans descended from? The answer isn't in Germany at all. To find where Germans truly come from, you have to leave Germany entirely and travel 2,600 kilometers east to a steppe that has no name in any German history book. If you've ever wondered where people really come from, and I mean really, subscribe, because what comes next in this series is going to change the way you see every origin story you've ever been told. Before we go any further, I want to know something. Drop it in the comments right now. Where does your family say you come from? A country, a region, a tribe, anything. Man, because by the end of this video, I'll show you why that answer might be sitting on top of a completely different story, entirely outside Europe, on a flat, burning steppe in what is now the Samara region of Russia. It's 2800 BCE. A man is being buried in a pit. He's roughly 35 years old. Someone placed a horse jaw beside him. His bones are coated in red ochre powder. He has never heard the word German. He has never been within 2,000 miles of the Rhine. But the Y chromosome in his cells carries the label scientists now call R1B-M269. And that marker is sitting in the DNA of the majority of modern German men. Iosif Lazaridis at Harvard Medical School had been working on this question alongside Wolfgang Hack's team. What they found was almost too clean to believe. The corded ware people, the first group to show this steppe ancestry in Germany, were genetically almost identical to the Yamnaya steppe pastoralists, despite living 2,600 kilometers apart. That's not drift. That's not slow movement over millennia. That's a migration so fast and so large, it barely left room for anything else. And yet, the data said something the archaeologists weren't expecting. It wasn't a slow drift. It was a flood. The Yamnaya ancestry in Germany went from near zero to roughly 75% in what looks like 2, maybe 3 generations. Not centuries. Not 1,000 years of gradual mixing. 2 or 3 generations. Your grandparents' 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 scale. That's how fast the world of Central Europe changed. In 2600 BCE, which in a place called Eulau, in what is now Saxony-Anhalt in Germany, 4 people were buried together, embracing a man, a woman, 2 children. DNA confirmed they were a nuclear family. The man carried full steppe ancestry. The woman did not. She was local. Her lineage traced back to the Neolithic farmers who had been in Germany for thousands of years. 1 family, 2 genetic worlds, 1 grave. And then there's the question nobody in this story wants to answer directly. The dominant paternal lineage of Germany's Neolithic farmers, a marker called G2A, essentially disappears from the genetic record within 500 years of the Yamnaya's arrival. Not reduced, not pushed to the margins, gone. Confirmed across 101 Bronze Age genomes, the male population of Neolithic Germany was replaced completely. The Yamnaya left their DNA in nearly every German alive today. They left no confirmed writing, no agreed-upon name, no single word in any language that we can trace back to what they called themselves. The people who became the Germans are, to all of recorded history, completely anonymous. Anonymous, but not invisible. They left something behind, and scientists found it in the dirt of central Germany, Esperstedt, a small region in the heart of modern Germany. In 2800 BCE, 17 individuals were buried here in what archaeologists call the corded wear horizon. The Max Planck Institute pulled their genomes. What came back didn't fully match the migration model that everyone had been working from. By Morten Allentoft at the Lundbeck Foundation, Geogenetics Center in Copenhagen had been building the largest ancient European genome dataset of its time. In 2015, his team published something that ended several decades of comfortable assumptions. The Bronze Age wasn't a slow blend. It was a series of population replacements, fast, large-scale, and in some cases almost total. And there were 3 things this data revealed. The third one ends the debate entirely. First, light skin was already spreading across Bronze Age Europe. Second, the complete Germanic look only assembled after the steppe migration. And third, lactose tolerance, the ability to digest milk as an adult, was not yet common in the steppe people when they arrived. The people who herded animals for a living couldn't fully digest their own animal's milk yet. And that trait came later, on a completely different genetic schedule. But here's the part that changes everything about how we picture this migration. When scientists mapped the sex of the remains at Esperstedt and other corded wear sites across Germany, they found a pattern. Steppe paternal DNA from the fathers, local Neolithic maternal DNA from the mothers, steppe men, local women, and local men, almost entirely absent from the new genetic picture. Scientists call this sex-biased admixture. In plain language, it means the men who were already there disappeared, and the men who arrived stayed and had children with local women. There's no proven massacre, no burned village layers at this scale, no clear evidence of a single mass conflict that explains it. The signature is there in the bones. The explanation is not. The people who built Germany's first permanent settlements, the LBK farmers, grew emmer wheat and kept cattle and buried their dead under their longhouses. Their architecture is still being found. Their Y chromosomes are not found in a single modern German genome. Not one. Either our entire migration timeline is wrong, or there were 2 Germanys, existing simultaneously, that never once met. The world they met when they arrived wasn't empty. It was built. Hochdorf, Baden-Württemberg, 530 BCE. A man is buried on a bronze couch, a 500-liter cauldron filled with mead, gold shoes on his feet, a 4-wheeled wagon beside him. His genome, mostly Neolithic farmer ancestry, with only minor steppe input. He is not Germanic in the way we use that word. He is Celtic. And his descendants' DNA is still in every modern German alive, unacknowledged, uncredited, largely unmentioned. Joscha Gretzinger at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig spent years building the genetic picture of early medieval Northwestern Europeans. What his team found rewrote the contribution record. Germanic-speaking populations maintained their own internal genetic clusters, even as they moved through Roman territory and settled across Europe. They held their shape, genetically, for centuries after the migrations began. Everything I just told you about Germanic ancestry, hold on to it, because it's about to mean something completely different. Because here's what that means for the Celts. The people who built the road networks, the trade infrastructure, mirrors the metalworking traditions that Germanic culture later built upon. They were largely Celtic in origin. The DNA confirms what the cultural record has always suggested, but history never fully credited. Germanic identity, at its origin, was assembled partly on top of Celtic foundations. The Hochdorf chieftain built what came before. History gave someone else the chapter. Near Hesse in Germany, there's a life-size Celtic sandstone statue called the Glauberg Warrior, dated to around 400 BCE. He wears a leaf-crowned headdress with no equivalent in Germanic art. The DNA from the burial near this statue carries a Y chromosome marker called I2A, a lineage that predates the steppe arrival by thousands of years. He is evidence of a civilization that existed, thrived, and was then written out of the origin story of the people who followed. When Roman writers described the Germanic tribes east of the Rhine in 100 BCE, many of those people were still carrying heavy Celtic and Neolithic ancestry. The cultural label came first. The genetic transformation came after. Germanic identity, at its core, may have been a cultural identity worn over a genetically different body. Actually, if you watched my last video on Neanderthals, the one about their DNA proof and physical strength, you already saw the first layer of this puzzle. Did that video change how you see human history? Tell me in the comments. Because what's coming next is exactly where that story leads. But here's where it gets strange. The very people Rome called Germanic destroyers may have been by blood more Roman than Rome itself. Rome didn't see the fusion coming, and honestly, neither will you. Regensburg. An ancient Roman name, Castra Regina, 179 AD, a Roman legion fort on the Danube. In 2019, excavations uncovered 47 individuals buried in Roman military style. Their DNA was not what anyone expected. North African, Levantine, Anatolian, Balkan, Germanic, all in the same graveyard. The Roman Empire's so-called German frontier was already a genetic fusion zone, before any invasion, before any tribe crossed the border in force. So here's the answer, right? Rome mixed with the North, the tribes came in, Europe blended together. Simple. Except the genomic data from the very next century makes that answer impossible to hold. What they found in those migration period genomes changed everything we thought we knew about how identity actually transfers. Gretzinger's team at the Max Planck Institute found something counterintuitive. Germanic-speaking populations moving through Europe during the migration period between roughly 300 and 700 AD showed DNA patterns that indicated they were reproducing mostly within their own communities, not freely mixing with the Roman populations around them. They were living among Romans for generations, in Roman cities, on Roman land, and genetically, they were staying largely separate. The great mixing happened, but it was slower, more selective, and more controlled than any history class ever taught. And then, there are the women of Bavaria. Krishna Virma at Stony Brook University in New York spent years on a specific and strange question. In 5th century Bavaria, a number of women were buried with artificially elongated skulls, a practice associated with Eastern European prestige culture. Their DNA showed Southeastern European genetic ancestry. They had been brought to Bavaria as part of what was effectively a marriage system spanning 2,000 kilometers. And their children carried both the steppe Yamnaya lineages of their Bavarian community and the Eastern European ancestry of their mothers. Joachim Berger at the University of Mainz put it directly in the published findings. Women with immigrant ancestry were more often buried with grave goods than women with local ancestry. These women were valued, visible in the burial record. And yet Rome's historians never mentioned them by name. The mitochondrial lineages of those Eastern European women brought to Bavaria in the 5th century appear in modern Bavarian population samples at frequencies that can't be explained by random chance. While the women Rome's historians never named are, genetically, still walking the streets of Munich. Munich, Bavaria. The place where modern German identity feels most rooted, most defined, most certain. Leipzig, 2022. The Max Planck Institute publishes a landmark study on medieval European genetics. It covers France in detail, Italy, Britain, Iberia. The sample coverage is broad and careful. Germany has a gap, not a small one. The medieval period of Germany, The home country of the institute doing the research, the territory with arguably the richest ancient DNA burial record in Europe, has measurably thinner coverage than comparable regions. The researchers cite permit delays. The gap remains. This was sitting in the data for years. Nobody followed up publicly until 2022, and then things went very quiet. What we do know is this. Medieval Germany was not the blended, unified genetic population that most people imagine. Communities were far more genetically stratified than assumed, separated not just by geography but by religion, occupation, legal status. People living in the same German city for generations, in adjacent neighborhoods, with measurably different genetic profiles. Not one Germany. Several, invisible to each other, living side by side. And then 1349 arrived. The Black Death killed an estimated 40% of Germany's population in 18 months. Post-plague skeletal samples from German sites show measurable shifts in Y chromosome frequencies. The plague didn't kill equally. Specific male lineages were hit harder than others. The modern German Y chromosome pool isn't just a record of who arrived in the Bronze Age. It's partly a record of who survived 1349. Scientists working near the unpublished medieval German dataset have described the preliminary results informally as complicated. In genomics, that word is never casual. It doesn't mean difficult. It means the data contradicts the model. There is a dataset. It exists. It has been partially analyzed, and every researcher who has seen it has gone very quiet. Quiet. That's the word for what happened to one specific genomic study in 2019. But first, something more personal. One single variant in one gene on chromosome 15. Scientists label it R-S129-13832 inside something called the HER-C2 gene. This is the primary genetic switch for blue eyes in European populations, and it was not present at meaningful frequency in Europe before 8,000 years ago. Before that point, the blue eyes, the single most iconic feature associated with Germanic appearance, were not a European trait. Stay with me, because this next part is the reason this video exists. David Reich at Harvard Medical School had been building the most comprehensive picture of ancient European genetics in the world across a decade of research. What his team found was that the physical appearance we associate with Germans assembled itself in pieces from three completely different sources. Light skin came from Anatolian farmers. Blue eyes came from Eastern hunter-gatherers. Light hair emerged only after the steppe ancestry mixed in. No single ancient population carried the full package, not one. The Germanic look is a convergence event, traits from three different worlds that happen to end up in the same place. Now, 1991, was an alpine glacier on the border of what is now Austria and Italy. A body emerges from the ice, frozen for 5,300 years. We call him Ötzi. He lived around 3,300 BCE, right at the edge of the early Yamnaya expansion. His genome, mostly Anatolian Neolithic farmer. His appearance from genomic reconstruction, dark skin, dark eyes, dark hair. He lived in what is now the German-Austrian-Italian border zone. He is a partial genetic ancestor of modern Germans. This is what Germany looked like. And there's one more thing the data revealed that almost nobody talks about. Lactose tolerance wasn't common in the steppe people when they first arrived. The most defining cultural practice of the Yamnaya, herding animals, wasn't yet written into their own biology. That trait came later, each spreading through the population after the migration. The timeline of their culture and the timeline of their genes were running on different clocks. In 2019, a preprint circulated claiming to have identified a specific physical profile that appeared in Central Europe around 1200 BCE and disappeared by 800 BCE. It was withdrawn before peer review was completed. The lead author has not published on ancient European phenotypes since. Someone built a genomic portrait of what the first Germans looked like. They completed the work, they withdrew it, and no one has tried again. Again, the same pattern, a different continent, a different millennium, the same unreadable signature in the bones. Lerna, Greece, 2200 BCE, the largest urban settlement in early Bronze Age Europe. It had walls. It had been growing for centuries. And then it burned in a single event. Post-collapse genetic analysis shows near total replacement of male lineages within 2 generations. Female continuity intact. No confirmed large-scale massacre site. The genomic crime scene is identical to central Germany 600 years earlier. 2 civilizations, 2 collapses, 1 signature, male lineages gone, female lineages continuing. No body, no weapon, no name. The same pattern repeating across Bronze Age Europe, and no one has fully agreed on what caused it. But here's where it gets strange. The answer may not be a war. It may be something far more intimate and far more terrifying. Morten Rasmussen's team at the University of Copenhagen confirmed the presence of an early form of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium behind bubonic plague, in ancient DNA from steppe burials dated to around 3000 BCE. The steppe people were carrying it, and some researchers now argue that what happened in Neolithic Germany wasn't conquest in the traditional sense. The steppe people may not have killed the farmers. They may have simply survived what the farmers couldn't. A pathogen so catastrophic to settled farming communities that it collapsed male populations before the first weapon was raised. Joachim Berger at the University of Mainz published with Verama's team on the Bavarian elongated skull burials. And what they found across 2 separate eras, the Bronze Age arrival and the 5th century migration period, was the same gender asymmetry. Foreign male genetic lineages arriving, local female lineages continuing. In both cases, the men who were already there disappeared from the record. A specific immune variant found in Yamnaya ancient DNA appears at elevated frequencies in modern populations from the regions of Germany with the highest corded ware ancestry, Saxony-Anhalt, Thuringia. The steppe migration didn't just reshape Germany's culture and language and appearance. It may have reshaped Germany's immune system. You may be here, watching this, because your ancestors survived something that killed everyone around them, and the protection they passed to you came from people whose name we do not know. Name. And that single word is the problem at the center of all of this. Berlin, 2026. Germany's Federal Statistics Office reports that 26% of the current population has a migration background. That number gets used in political debates, in identity discussions, in arguments about what Germany is and who belongs there. Ancient DNA tells us that 100% of Germany's population has a migration background, going back at least 4,500 years. The only question history keeps asking about Germans is the wrong question. Not where did they come from, but what survives when everything else gets replaced. This isn't just ancient history. The answer is in the language you're listening to right now. Your Grutzinger's team at the Max Planck Institute, when they mapped the ancient DNA of early medieval northwestern Europe, found that the populations of northern Germany and southern Scandinavia were genetically almost indistinguishable from each other. Same identity by descent clusters, same Y haplogroup frequencies, same autosomal ancestry profile. The genetic border between what we call German and what we call Scandinavian did not exist in the form we imagine it before approximately 900 AD. The Viking and the Saxon were, in the genomic record, the same person. The separation between Germanic and Scandinavian identity solidified in less than the last 1100 years. Both identities were built on the same Bronze Age steppe foundation, then dressed in different languages, different myths, different kingdoms. In 625 AD, Dura king was buried at Sutton Hoo in what is now eastern England. The helmet found in that burial is stylistically identical to helmets excavated in Vendel, Sweden. DNA from Anglo-Saxon burials in the same region confirms Scandinavian ancestry in the ruling elite. An English king, in English soil, genetically Swedish, wearing Swedish armor. Speaking what would become Old English, classified as West Germanic, not North Germanic. The categories were invented after the people. If the German-Scandinavian genetic split solidified post-900 AD, then German, as a stable genetic concept, is younger than the Carolingian Empire, younger than the oldest manuscript written in Old High German, far younger than anyone expected. The genome of the first person ever recorded by name as German, a Frankish warrior named in a 9th century chronicle, has never been sequenced. When it is, it may not look German at all. At all. That's the phrase that ends every thread in this story. The Rhine at dawn, flat water, gray light, the river that Roman writers called the border of Germania. It wasn't a border, it was a corridor. Everything that made Germany passed through it and kept moving. Ancient DNA now covers 45,000 years of human presence in German territory. In those 45,000 years, the genetic majority of the population was replaced at least 4 times. Each group that arrived called that land home. The Ice Age hunters called it home, the Neolithic farmers called it home, the Yamnaya descendants called it home. Or the Germanic tribes called it home. All of them were right. None of them were first. There is no genetic line that runs unbroken from ancient Germany to modern Germany. There are only waves, each one believing it was the shore. If the story of where we come from is this layered, this alive, this full of erasures and survivals and unnamed people, then every population on Earth is sitting on top of the same unanswered question. Subscribe, because we're going to open every single one of them. The Germans did not descend from a people. They descended from a collision, and the collision is still happening.